We'll sell our homes before we sell our Bitcoin. And when you realize that they're not going to add inflationary pressures if this thing goes up to $1 million a coin or $10 million a coin, we're still going to like our Bitcoin more than the things that we can buy with it.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Peter Dunworth to the podcast. Peter is partner at the Bitcoin Advisor, helping you safely custody your Bitcoin with MULTI-SIG collaborative custody, and he runs a multifamily office for high net worth individuals. Welcome to the Bitcoin Age, Peter.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to chatting with you. I know you've talked to quite a few people lately, but for my audience, will you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got into Bitcoin? I know that your brother told you about it when it was around $3, and it took you a little while to get into it. Was that a bit of an ego journey for you?
It was a glorious lesson in humility for me. And so the story on that, so I've been in finance my whole life, and this is where, I beat myself up about it, but then give myself some grace that, 25 years of education and indoctrination into our existing financial and education system leaves you with some blind spots. And so when my brother said to me, hey, you should buy this Bitcoin, it was $3 at the time. I had a huge ego when it came to finance because I worked in finance. So I thought I knew what money was and I thought I knew about finance. And I dismissed that. And I had every calling card of a no coiner where I said, that'll never work. And then I said, the governments will shut it down. There'll be a new Bitcoin because it's technology. So there's always a new thing that's better. And then I just succumbed to, I capitulated and just literally bought Bitcoin. But that period took me 5 years, and I wish I had have known what I know now back then, because I just would have put my life savings into Bitcoin at $3. But it was a very different risk profile back then. But I love sharing that story because I think every Bitcoiner goes through a similar journey of humility and being humbled by Bitcoin, that it's a constant journey. And this is where, I always feel like I'm learning something new about Bitcoin. There are so many Bitcoiners in the world who, although I've sort of been in this space a few years, I feel like every single day I learn, and there is so much to learn, and I just keep learning. The rabbit hole goes deeper and deeper. But what is interesting, say from a financial perspective or investment perspective, and that's where sort of my day-to-day sits, and looking at investments across all asset classes. What is completely unique about Bitcoin to me is, having spent probably close to 20,000 hours staring at Bitcoin and looking at it, understanding it, and all the rest of it, this is the first investment that I've seen where the more I look at it, the better it gets relative to everything else. And what typically happens with most investments is you start looking at it, it looks shiny and glossy, it looks wonderful, and then you start scratching at it, and all of a sudden you start peeling layers back, and you're like, oh my goodness, this is, something wrapped in alfoil that looked shiny, and now it's really not. So I look at that and think Bitcoin is the complete opposite. It looks like a pet rock. And then the more you study it, the more you scratch away, you realize that you're peeling all of these layers back to, find out that this thing is better than digital gold. So I urge anyone and sort of share that story to say, for two reasons. Firstly, it's a humbling experience and it's worth learning about. And the other sort of key take out of that is, on a risk-adjusted basis, now's the best time to be buying Bitcoin, not at $3. Because at $3, there was a lot of uncertainty. We didn't know if it was going to turn off tomorrow. We didn't know if the code was tight. We didn't have all of these things in place to support it and the ecosystem that is what it is now. And I look at today at a price of $80-something thousand, and I think, on a risk-adjusted basis, I would much rather be buying today than back at $3.
So for people who still haven't got in, we are still early.
That's the message to take away.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I want to get into more things, but before we get into them, I want to just talk about the macro, because I know you're quite knowledgeable on that. And today I heard that Trump paused the tariffs. Do you think this is going to make a big difference for the markets and for Bitcoin?
Ultimately, no. I think there's a lot of hysteria around this, and I think a lot of people don't really understand the position that the US is in right now. And the analogy I would put forward is that the US is a terminally ill patient, and they're trying, they've got cancer, they're trying chemo, they've got radiation, and it's just not working. And so what I think, regardless of what you think about Trump, he's shaking the box, he's trying something different, and it's like a patient who's on their deathbed wanting to try a new drug. Who would stop someone who's basically dying from wanting to try a new drug or something different? And I look at this and think there's a lot of hysteria in the markets. A lot of the people who are crying and screaming about what's going on are the same people who are crying and screaming about COVID. And look, this could be different, but the definition of insanity is trying the same thing and thinking something's going to be different. So I'm all for trying to change the status quo and shaking the box to see where things fall. And ultimately, and this is something that I don't think, being an American-centric globe at the moment, a lot of this is missed on Americans, because what they, I think, say, please forgive me, my American friends and brethren, for saying this, but there is a worldview that Americans are quite myopic in their worldview, in that everything revolves around America. And if I was American, I'd feel exactly the same way, because everything does revolve around America, if we're being honest. The dollar, just about everything. But what I think a lot of the noises I hear about, oh, this will never work and all the rest of it, is because people don't really understand how bad everywhere else is. And a lot of people are underestimating the American psyche and the ability for Americans to come back harder and faster than any other country on earth. So if they tear everything to the ground, the first thing is everyone else is going to suffer a much greater fate than the US. And so from the rubble, the US is going to be able to come back much faster and harder than everyone else, because they've got the best property rights, they've got the most liquid capital markets, they've got the best infrastructure, like all of that. Everyone else relative to the US is going to suffer. So I look at this and think, and this may be flippant, but if you're on your deathbed, why don't you try something? It might actually just save the patient. So I look at this and say, hey, have at it. Let's see where it goes. If in the very worst case scenario, you're just bringing forward the inevitable 5 or 10 years.
So the reason you're saying they're on their deathbed is because even though the US has the world reserve currency, they have too much debt and the system is falling apart.
Yes. Yeah. And it's worse everywhere else in the world. But I look at this and I think, by eating your medicine, you get to do it on your terms, and you get to bring forward all of that, and you have a lot more control over it rather than fading off into the night. And I look at this, and if we shrink this down into a microcosm, and this is where we talk to people all day, but it's same as a personal situation. There are a lot of people who are looking at their retirement accounts with the firm knowledge that they're not going to be able to meet their living requirements based on the pension balance that they have right now. And I look at this and think, when we're talking about Bitcoin, if you use the actuarial tables to forecast out the returns of your pension fund over the next 10 or 15 years, and then how much money that's going to provide you in retirement, and realize it doesn't matter what you do, you're going to be living on a subsistence level wage that's going to be subsidized by the government. That's the choice that most Americans, most of the people in the world have right now. The only saving grace I see to outperform those actuarial tables is to put as much of your pension balance into Bitcoin as you can stomach. And that is the only way you have a way of getting out. And this is the conversation I have with people is, look, based on these actuarial tables, you're going to have 5 decent years of retirement, and then it's going to fall away and you'll be eating cat food. However, yeah, I know, right? It's not a pretty appealing thought, right? The thought of that is just terrifying. And so it's like, do you want to live on your knees, or do you want to take what's a perceived risk with Bitcoin to effectively pull that plane up and actually have a retirement that's going to not only provide for your retirement, but will probably be able to leave a legacy for your children as well? And that really is the conversation.
And that is because the US is printing too much money. Australia is printing too much money. Is that the bottom line? Everything is downstream of money?
Everything. And this is where the US has actually been a very good custodian. They've been the global reserve currency, and they've achieved that status because of the legacy and how industrial they were throughout World Wars I and II. They maintained that position, but they didn't abuse that position, because although they've been printing money, and circa 7% per annum for the last 50 years or more, the rest of the world has been far worse than they have. So therein lies the conundrum. That's bad, but everywhere else is worse. So, I mean, if you're comparing apples to apples, the US is still really good. But now we have something that's completely different that can maintain its position without any dilution through time. And that is the magic of Bitcoin.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about Australia. I've heard that housing is really expensive, and that's one of the big reasons why people start coming into Bitcoin. And is a Bitcoin adoption quite big there?
I think we're seeing a seismic shift in Bitcoin adoption at the moment. We've got not only, I think, a lot of the younger cohort are trying to move into Bitcoin because they don't see themselves having a future of buying a property. But a lot of the baby boomers contact us to get this done because now all of a sudden they realize the macro is really just a much bigger picture of the micro. So if you shrink it down to a family level, most people running a family realize that they might have a 25 or a 30-year-old living at home who can't afford to buy a place. And that's the generation that's meant to be out of the home, buying properties, and then ultimately buying these properties. Now that the boomers are selling, and they're realizing, well, if my kids can't afford it, and my friends' kids can't afford it, who's going to be buying these properties from me? And so to me, there's the smart money is actually moving into Bitcoin now and leaving property while there are still buyers in that sector to go into an asset class that's completely, I think, mispriced and misunderstood.
And what you do is you recommend self-custody. And I know it's a multi-sig collaborative self-custody. Why do you recommend that when now today people have the choice of the ETFs?
Very good question. On many levels, I think self-custody is the most important thing you can do because it allows for the greatest optionality with the lowest risk and the greatest security. So if you look at those three things, optionality, when you hold the underlying, you have the option to move that anywhere in the world whenever you wish at any point in time. So you've got full control over it. When it's in an ETF, you don't have that full control. The other optionality that I'm sort of trying to plan for my clients sort of 10 years out is the banks are coming with lending products. They're not here yet, but they're going to be here in less than 5 years, and they are going to offer great lending products. And what's really interesting about Bitcoin is it's a globally ubiquitous asset that every bank on earth will be able to loan against at some point in time. And in very high level terms, as a Bitcoiner, you'll be able to take your Bitcoin to any bank on earth who was offering the cheapest rate, and you'll be able to get a loan for probably less than 1%, probably a negative interest rate loan. Whereas if you hold your Bitcoin in an ETF, you're going to be constrained to that regulatory environment. So if you hold it in Australia, you'll be confined to an Australian regulation or regulatory environment, or the US, you're constrained to the US. And you'll be subject to the margin lending laws or rates of that jurisdiction. And I look at, say, the US and Australia, we've got comparable rates on this. We're sitting at somewhere between an 8 to 10% margin call, like margin rate on borrowing on your Bitcoin if it's in an ETF. And I look at this and think, well, if I hold the underlying and the retail banks in Japan are offering Bitcoin loans, I can go and send my Bitcoin to Japan, a retail bank up there, literally at the flick of a switch, and I can access an interest rate at sub 2%. So immediately I've got a 6 to 8% differential or arbitrage on the financing rate of holding it by self-custody or having it in an ETF. So I think that's a key component. The second point I mentioned was security, or was actually risk, but we'll talk about security first. When you secure your Bitcoin, you have much greater security, I believe, than if you have an ETF, because there are a host of different things that you can do to protect that. You can geographically distribute that. And I guess you can wrap up risk and security in one thing because they both cover sort of similar angles. You reduce your risk dramatically by having what I believe a collaborative security protocol, because you can have keys in different jurisdictions. So regardless of what happens to you in your jurisdiction, your Bitcoin can be X jurisdiction, which is a much more powerful way to be. Whereas this is the only asset in the world that allows you to have your Bitcoin everywhere and nowhere all at the same time. So every other asset, including gold, is subject to the limitations of the jurisdiction in which you're in. Now, it might sort of sound airy-fairy, and Peter, why does this even matter? Because it doesn't matter until it does. And then when it does matter, it's almost as important as oxygen. So the reason why I bring this up is that you never want to, and this is sort of the advice we try and put together for the families we put together and on Bitcoin side of thing as well, is you want to maintain maximum optionality at all times. because you never know what's going to change in your favor, and you want to be able to have the ability to access that. So long story short, you want to hold your Bitcoin rather than have an ETF. And one thing I will say, though, is the ETF is actually a gateway drug to Bitcoin. It's just at the top of the funnel. People will put it in because they can press a button to buy it and get exposure to it. And then once they've got exposure to it, they'll learn about it, and then they'll come down the funnel and self-custody.
Yep, down the rabbit hole. Love that.
That's it.
So what are some of your clients' main concerns about Bitcoin?
Question. I think the number one problem that we solve for is the recoverability or inheritability of your Bitcoin, particularly for people who are self-custodying. It's a very difficult thing to self-custody your Bitcoin and be sure that you have a secure and bulletproof approach to being able to pass your Bitcoin from the grave without opening up vulnerabilities to your Bitcoin while you're still alive. That is really the main catch. And so what we've done is been able to, with collaborative security, create a system that allows you to self-custody your Bitcoin that removes every single point of failure from your self-custody setup. And most importantly, if you don't wake up tomorrow, your family, your beneficiaries, your loved ones aren't going to miss out on the Bitcoin that you've worked so hard to accrue. And so that to me is probably one of our, I think, finest professional moment is that we've worked with a multitude of people. Sadly, three of our clients have passed in the nearly decade that we've been doing this. And most importantly, no client has lost a single Satoshi, which is the most important thing we can deliver, is that peace of mind. And like all good Bitcoiners, it's not a matter of, hey, trust me, bro. Like, we're not about that. The best part for me about what I do is, when we sit down and see a client, the service that we offer isn't really for the Bitcoiner and the family. It's really for the Bitcoiner's family, because the best part for me is actually meeting the family and, introducing ourselves, getting to know them. And at first they look at us like magic internet friends that should have two heads. And then we get to spend some time with them. And most importantly, rather than trust me, bro, we actually, don't trust, verify, and show them how their loved ones would recover the Bitcoin. And most importantly, show them that there's nothing the loved ones can do to steal the Bitcoin while they're still alive. But they've got the total backup and peace of mind of that. And this is where, say, a funny thing happens when you can prove to someone that that is the case. All of a sudden, the Bitcoiner now has, either explicitly or implicitly, approval from their partner or their children or whoever it might be to then go and put more money into Bitcoin. And that's the fun part for me, is once we've solved the catastrophic failure and removed that from a client's picture, then most partners realize, hey, this is a really good thing, but I just don't want to know about it and I don't want to be responsible for it. And when you remove the responsibility of the partner being responsible for learning about seed words and SD cards and all these things that are, Bitcoiners love, but everyone else just goes straight over their head, a funny thing happens. And this is where the other proud moment from a work perspective is, and we've got to update these figures, but the latest figure I had was clients in the first 12 months of working with us increased their Bitcoin stack by an average of 51%.
Wow.
And that's because all of the pressure's taken off and they know they've got a bulletproof solution, so they can apply more capital to it. And that, to me, that's the fun part.
Yeah, that's really cool. And about the families, I can see that, because most people who have families, the families aren't into it like them, that's for sure. And it's very difficult to teach somebody who doesn't want to learn.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. And I know you don't give exact allocations, but what do you recommend to people? Or is that an individual basis?
As much as you can sleep with.
Good one.
Yeah, literally as
Yeah.
much as you can sleep with. And truth be told, I've never met a client who has actually applied what I told them they should do. Never, not one.
You mean they either go under or over?
No, they're always under, always under. And so this is where, if I'm catching up with a family today, and the conversation would be, you should have at least a 25% allocation to this, and probably closer to 50. I know for a fact I won't get them to 5. The beauty of that is, and this is sort of the second order consequences of this is, hey, get to 5 or get to 10%. Well, get to 5, would normally say get to 10% at least. Most people will go, I can't get there. If they're lucky, they'll get to 5%. And that's a huge stretch. And the second they get to 5, I say, look, you shortchanged me. You said you get to 10, you got to 5. So when this thing halves in value, I'm going to come back and ask for the other 5% so we can dollar cost average at a lower cost. And this is where having someone who's sort of been through the ups and downs, I think is really helpful. And it's really important sort of channeling Nassim Taleb on this for any advisor you work with to make sure that they've got skin in the game. And probably the most important question you can ask any of your advisors is, don't tell me what I should do with my money, just tell me what you do with yours. And that will tell you everything you need to know.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that the only other thing that you really invest in is MicroStrategy, and of course, probably your home.
No home, MicroStrategy.
Great.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to sell my home last year, and the Australian property market just doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And this is the crazy thing about it. It's an overinflated asset bubble, I think. We're sitting at Sydney median house prices are somewhere between $1.6 to $2 million. And we have an average median income is $100,000. So that's before tax as well. So what you're telling me is someone needs to save for 40 years and save all of their money that they earn in order to buy a home. Insanity. And the sad part is 40, nearly 50 years ago, that figure was more like it was 3 years worth of wages. Now it's 20. So admittedly, interest rates have come down dramatically, but nowhere near enough to offset that percentage basis cost of owning a home.
Yeah, that's crazy. I also sold property to buy Bitcoin. It just didn't make sense. And the upkeep and the maintenance fees, yeah, I get it.
It's a level of freedom that you're really not familiar with until you do. And a lot of people think that the home is the thing that they want to have for that peace of mind and security. And I can't tell you how liberating it is not being responsible for one.
Yeah. And knowing that you have your stored energy and your wealth in something that goes up over time and that you really believe in.
Yeah, it's funny from a demographics perspective. I look at this and think Australia's got 25 million people. We're importing maybe 1 million people a year at best, and truth be told, that number needs to be slashed dramatically because everyone's quite annoyed with the level of immigration because it's increasing the cost of housing, cost of living pressures, and the rest of it. And I look at this and think, just on a demographic perspective, I think there might be maybe less than 1% of the world, less than 10 million people who are into Bitcoin. Yet it's a need for 8 billion people like food and shelter. And just looking at that as property, if I told you there was a piece of property you could buy where 8 billion people are going to need it at some point in time, but only 10 million people have turned up, would you like the look of that? Or would you like to come and buy property in Sydney where there's 25 million people already there, everyone's already got a home, maybe two, the cost of living is expensive and they're importing more people? That demographic shift is going to drop, so that's going to be a downward pressure on that. And interest rates are really high and it costs money to maintain, whereas this place is free and there's no maintenance requirements. I look at this and I think it's only a matter of time before the world wakes up to, oh my goodness, I can store my wealth in this asset, which is low maintenance, low risk, and returning circa 50% per annum, versus this asset, which at best is really going to struggle to keep up with the money issuance. So I look at this and think, why would I want to do that? And in addition to that, I've got to have a loan out on it. I've got to take out additional liabilities, and then I've got to pay for the upkeep of it. It just doesn't make any sense when you look at it objectively.
Yeah. What does Michael Saylor call it? Digital Manhattan? And it is something like that. Do you also subscribe to what Jeff Booth says and others say, that if Bitcoin fails as a medium of exchange, it will fail as a store of value?
Well, it's hard to disagree with Jeff Booth on anything. He is a master of the domain, one of my favorite people. So I don't want to go against Jeff on that. I think maybe we're working on different timeframes. He's ultimately correct. Short term, no, we've got some grace. that you can build store of value functionality into everything. And I think there's a huge role for Bitcoin to play in the recapitalization of the banking industry and the lending or debt markets. Ultimately, Jeff is right. Yes, there needs to be a functioning medium of exchange with Bitcoin at some point in time. However, I'm not sure we're going to get that as long as there's a US dollar pegged to it. And this is sort of the trade-offs, no solutions, only trade-offs. When you've got a US dollar like Tether pegged as a stable coin to Bitcoin, they can issue as much money as you want. And this is where I sort of have the conversation. Well, do you want Bitcoin to go up forever at an exponential rate? That sounds fun and appealing. Then if that's the case, you're going to have a US dollar stable coin and Tether attached to it, because as long as they can print ad infinitum, the value of Bitcoin can go up infinitely. But the second you remove the US peg to Bitcoin, then all of a sudden we're really working on constraints within the system. So now there is it's probably a much simpler pricing mechanism, but for us it's a much more difficult thing to get our heads around because there's no reference point of something that we think is stable. But this is the indoctrination of 25 years. We think the US dollar is stable, but what we don't realize is that that's wildly volatile, because that's basically going up and down depending on the money issuance or the contraction or expansion of the money supply. Whereas Bitcoin is one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin, as we like to say. But then determining what value you can get for that one Bitcoin as far as goods and services in the market goes will be a huge shift. And this is where just concede to Jeff. He's years ahead of all of us. And so he's right.
But I think you're right. It's really long term. So in the short term, Bitcoin will exist while the fiat system continues for quite a long time, and we don't know how long. Yeah. You're known as the bullish Bitcoin guy. You're always very bullish. Why are you so bullish? And are you still bullish for the cycle?
Why am I so bullish? I guess if everyone understood how shit everything else was, which is where I spend my day-to-day, sorry for the crass language, but if you understood how bad everything else is, all of a sudden Bitcoin looks really good. And then I look at Bitcoin being a viable solution for a whole host of our problems in the capital markets, solving sovereign debt problems. And I think a lot of people just haven't thought that that's a solution to it. But I look at this and think, no, this is the solution to it, because if you understood everything else that is a potential solution to it, then you'd realize that you're only left with one choice, really. And this is where a lot of people want to say, there are other choices, and they want to argue about it. It's like, well, spend 1,000 hours on Bitcoin and then tell me there's a better choice than this. And this is where a lot of people want to take a middle ground on it and sit on the fence and say, oh, well, we can do this and that. Look, we are just so far past that. Just like, for want of a lack of a better term, get some determination and some mongrel and make a decision that you're actually going to live and die by, rather than typical economist on one hand versus the other hand. It's like, no, this is the solution. We all know it, but there is a very high conviction in this that is the best solution on a risk-adjusted basis and on a cost-benefit analysis. I look at this and think, well, we want the maximum benefit for the lowest cost. And when you factor in a whole host of things, whether it's economic returns, financial returns, a lack of impact downstream on society, a lack of inflation, because when there's always consequences, second-order consequences. And this is where, by funding and financializing Bitcoin, because of the type of person who owns Bitcoin, to, I guess, coin a phrase from a friend, Preston, they're psychopaths. They don't want to sell this thing. They'll sell to your point and my point, we'll sell our homes before we sell our Bitcoin. And when you realize that they're not going to add inflationary pressures if this thing goes up to $1 million a coin or $10 million a coin, we're still going to like our Bitcoin more than the things that we can buy with it. And so that's going to withdraw a lot of inflationary pressure that if you had a house or a property and your stocks went through the roof the same way Bitcoin did, people typically churn those assets much faster than Bitcoin. And so that would cause huge inflationary pressures and huge cost of living increases, and housing unaffordability would go up. And this is where I look at this, and I think the TLDR on this is understanding what our options are in front of us and having a pretty deep understanding, probably more so than most people, Bitcoin seems like a logical conclusion to come to on a risk-adjusted basis and cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah. And looking at it another way, Bitcoin, because of its nature, there's no leader. There's no way to cheat Bitcoin. You started out by saying that, the US and countries around the world are in very tough place because we've kind of run our systems into the ground with overprinting, and fiat money incentivizes people to get greedy. And with Bitcoin, you don't have a choice. It's open to everybody. Everybody can buy small amounts, and you can't cheat Bitcoin. I mean, yes, you can scam in other ways, but Bitcoin itself has never been hacked. And so, do you think ultimately Bitcoin creates a better world?
Without a shadow of a doubt. And it starts on a personal level, and this is where I look at the life changes that Bitcoin has brought to me personally. And I'm really grateful, both on a financial sense and a personal or spiritual sense, without wanting to get too woo-woo. It really is a fabulous tool for ascending Maslow's needs hierarchy as quickly as possible. So, that pursuit of self-actualization, without sorting out the financial aspects of your life, there's no way possible for you to ascend that Maslow's needs hierarchy. And this is where I think that Maslow's needs hierarchy and the need to self-actualize is effectively a spiritual journey, which ironically is brought about by a technology void of spirituality or finance. And so the conundrum with Bitcoin is that it's not really finance, even though we put a dollar value to it. It's really a technology that we ascribe a dollar value to. And at the same time, it allows Bitcoiners or people who use that as a tool for their furthering themselves to ascend that Maslow's needs hierarchy to self-actualization quicker than any other tool available.
I've never heard someone explain it like that. And by the way, I always get a bit woo-woo because I ask people, well, how has Bitcoin changed you? You mentioned some ways, but how has Bitcoin changed you?
Firstly, I'm very grateful to the Bitcoin community. The Bitcoin community has been nothing short of wonderful to me. I can't tell you how supportive, constructive, helpful Bitcoiners' ability to share knowledge. And when you come at this with a sincerity of asking questions and wanting to further your understanding of things, there's literally a list as long as my arm of Bitcoiners who have contributed to, getting to this point in time. So as far as communities go, I think it's a fabulous community, very helpful, extremely selfless, focused on a bigger mission beyond themselves. And this is where, it's such an honor to be part of this community. Wanting to, I think, sound corny, I think Bitcoin and the community, when you're involved in that, makes you want to do better and be better. And I look at someone we mentioned earlier who I think ascribes all of those values personified is Jeff Booth. I sit down and listen to him and just think, what a great human being out there working for all of us. And it's hard not to love people like that who are putting their best in every day to further humanity. And this is where what's really unique about Bitcoin is it's the first tool that humanity has that we can all agree on. And this is where if you look at social constructs, there has always been a difficulty in aligning interests from a social perspective. This is why we've got, Dunbar's number of 150. That's sort of your tribe. And then to get bigger than that, how do you collectivize people into a similar focus? Probably the most successful way of doing that right now has been religion, where I think the largest religion on earth has got just over 2 billion people. But it's effectively a mindset or an ideology that allows billions of people to focus and harness their energy in a certain direction. And this is where I look at, once 8 billion people understand how Bitcoin works and that there's nothing Bitcoin can do to hurt you. However, there's a lot that Bitcoin can give you if you harness it and adopt it. All of a sudden, this is a tool that 8 billion people can play with and support and get aligned with. And I look at this and think, well, to my knowledge, this is the first tool that humanity has had that 8 billion people will be able to agree on.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, it is even a spiritual tool. Bitcoin itself might not be spiritual, but it does encourage us, or it's inspired me to be a better person. And I absolutely agree. The Bitcoiners have been amazing. There's something about people who get this. Why do you think more people don't get it?
That's easy because it sounds like a scam. Literally every red flag in your head should go off when you hear this. Hey, do you want to get rich? This thing just goes up forever. All of these things that, it's perfect money. There's no inflation. There's no debasement. There's none of that. And you hear that, and probably the lesson that we were given as children, the first financial lesson we were given as children was probably, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So there's your first red flag. So, okay, instantly Bitcoin is put in well, this is a scam, or it's for the converted. These people are living in a cult. And the fact is, I think the reason why people are so obsessive with Bitcoin is that it's had such a dramatic impact on their lives for the better that they want to share this with family and friends and say, hey, look at all the benefits this has given me. I don't want you to miss out because I love you. And sadly, that's a very tough thing to do. It's a tough sell. And one of my favorite sayings in Bitcoin is, when thinking of Bitcoin in that context, is a prophet has no honor in his hometown, a Bible verse that, no one of our friends and family is listening to Peter Dunworth about why Bitcoin's good for them. Maybe they do a little bit more than, say, others because of my financial background and what I do day to day. But in short, every Bitcoiner suffers the same fate, that they want to help their friends and family on this journey to improve their lives. And, one of the side effects of this is you get fabulously wealthy doing it. Where's the downside in that? It sounds like the perfect drug. But this is the problem, is that some things are too good to be true, and so people don't want to do it. And this is where trying to get someone to do something is probably the most important thing, even if it seems inconsequential or not relevant to them. Just do something, whether it's, hey, $5, $10, $100, and do that in a way that allows them to participate and actually see it. And this is where sort of the fun part comes in, where a story about some of my godchildren. I bought them all $100 worth of Bitcoin nearly 10 years ago now. And that $100 of Bitcoin is worth about 12,000 Aussie dollars now. And so all of a sudden these kids are running around with 12 grand in their pocket, but I don't know if their parents or not have given it to them. But at the same time, it's a great educational tool for them to see it, and for their parents to look at this as well and go, oh, wow, look at this. It's gone up significantly in value. I think it comes down to just doing your very best and leading by example, and hopefully friends and family will follow you in that journey.
Well, just that amount of time going from 100 to 12,000, that must have orange pilled all of the families around them anyway, because there's the proof. I think often the problem is the volatility, and somebody might recommend it and then it crashes and loses. Our world, we want a quick fix, right? Everybody's looking for a quick fix, and that's why many people go to the altcoins. But
that's it.
If you're given enough time, then Bitcoin is going to orange pill more people.
Yeah, this is where I've got to say Bitcoin in your pension fund is so powerful, because typically pensions are, in a structure that we can't touch for many, many years. So as long as you can reduce the risk of Bitcoin, which self-custody and what we do, I think, goes a long way to solving the risk of Bitcoin, i.e. losing it, then the volatility of Bitcoin is really solved with duration. Just hold it for longer. And if you can hold it for longer and have that in an environment that's tax incentivized, like an IRA, or in Australia, our pension system, then that to me is the holy grail of an asset that you want to have in that type of system, because you get the maximum benefits of tax-free or capital gains tax-free through time. At the same time, you can't touch it. So, what are you going to sell it for? And this is the problem, that most people are taking, when they invest in Bitcoin, they're not betting with house money, i.e. they're betting with scared money. And when it goes down and doesn't go the way they want, they sell out and have a bad experience with it. But with your pension money, you can put that money to work, leave it there, and come back in 5 or 10 years' time, and you probably have 100x return on.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of forced savings.
That's it.
Yeah. So for our last question, Peter, would you agree that time is our most valuable resource? And has this statement changed for you since you found Bitcoin?
Probably become more profound. I do agree with the statement, time is our most valuable resource, because everything comes downstream of that. Your family, friends, what have you, which I would consider right up there, but time is the most important, because without it, you don't get any of the others. I think probably Gigi did the best work on Bitcoin and time. Some of his work has been really profound in shaping my way of thinking about Bitcoin and how that relates to time. And then the secondary function of that is how time affects you, and then how time affects money, and why Bitcoin is so valuable, that we have a finite resource. And usually there's a disconnect when you say finite resource and time. Most people don't put time to that. They just think, oh, well, there's not a lot of it. But time is the only other thing that's finite. We get a set amount of time here on this earth, and that's it. And this is where I think Bitcoin really brings home a whole host of lessons to you about what's important. And this is probably adds to why Bitcoin is really, I'm reluctant to say it because I live in the finance world and look at it from a dollar perspective, but it contributes to a spiritual journey dramatically, because it makes you aware of that function of time and how that relates to yourself and then money as well. So that's probably the impetus, the catalyst at the bottom of that Maslow's needs hierarchy, to really send you on that journey.
I love that. Tell us where people can find you, Peter.
The easiest place would be on X, Peter BTC Advisor with an ER, or alternatively, thebitcoinadvisor.com, and that's advisor with an ER. There's a stack of great advisors on the site. You can contact me if you want to catch up for a meeting and talk about any of the things that we talked about. But we're really focused on getting all Bitcoins off exchange and into self-custody. And if you're having trouble with it, please reach out. We'd love to help.
Yep, that's what we recommend, self-custody. Thank you so much for joining me today, Peter.
Thanks so much, Paula. We'll sell our homes before we sell our Bitcoin. And when you realize that they're not going to add inflationary pressures if this thing goes up to $1 million a coin or $10 million a coin, we're still going to like our Bitcoin more than the things that we can buy with it.